Did you know most people turn into a version of themselves they never intended to be? Not because they made the wrong choices, but because they stopped paying attention to the small ways their environment was shaping them. It doesn't happen through big decisions or dramatic moments. It happens through the small influences and routines that slowly pull you in a direction you didn't expect. And by the time you notice something's different, it already feels normal, even if it's not really who you wanted to become. And maybe it sounds a little exaggerated at first, but most people don't change because something extreme or traumatic happened. The shift is usually much quieter. You start adapting to whatever's around you, and those little adjustments slowly add up, forming you into a new person. And because it happens so gradually, it feels normal. What actually changes you is the everyday atmosphere you're surrounded by. For example, the way people around you handle things, the conversations you're part of, and the habits you repeat without thinking. Those things slowly influence how you respond and think. And over time, they can make behaviors that once felt wrong start feeling completely normal. That's the part people rarely admit. It's easier to blame one big moment for who you've become than to see how the version of you today was shaped quietly over time. People adapt to their atmosphere more than they realize. When you're in the same environment long enough, you start acting the way everyone else does without even noticing the shift. It's subtle. You pick up small reactions, certain attitudes, and maybe a way of dealing with things that didn't come from you originally. And none of it feels like changing your identity, but it slowly nudges you in a new direction. And that's where identity drift actually starts. Maybe you handle things a little differently now, or your priorities feel slightly off from what they used to be. It's nothing huge on its own, but together, these small changes can create a version of you that doesn't fully match who you thought you were becoming. So why does this even happen? A big part of it is influence, and not the obvious kind. Nobody needs to tell you how to act for you to adjust. Just being around certain behaviors makes your mind lean toward them, because humans naturally sync with whatever feels regular around them. Your brain isn't trying to reshape you, it's trying to make life easier by keeping things smooth and predictable. But sometimes that smooth path pulls you into becoming someone you didn't choose. Another part is imitation, but not in the sense that you're copying anyone. You just start matching the way people around you move through their lives, and your mind picks it up unconsciously. Obviously, it's nothing dramatic, but it's just a slow shift that eventually changes how you respond to things. Then there's the environment itself, the overall atmosphere you fall into without thinking about it. You naturally adjust to whatever space you're in, and even though it doesn't feel like a big deal in the moment, those new expectations and small behavioral shifts slowly shape the kind of person you become. There's also an emotional side to this that makes some people drift, because the version of themselves they wanted to become started feeling too distant or too hard to maintain, so they naturally settle into something that feels easier to carry. Others drift simply because they're too exhausted to push against the patterns around them, and that slow shift starts long before they even notice it. And it's not just young people. Adults do this too. You walk into a new group, and without really thinking about it, you adjust yourself a little so things feel easier. It doesn't feel like you're changing who you are, it just feels practical in the moment. People study this and give it different labels, but none of that really matters when you're the one experiencing it. From the inside, it never feels like you're following anything or picking up anyone's habits. It just feels like your normal day-to-day. But that ordinary day-to-day is exactly what ends up shaping you the most. What makes identity drift tricky is how comfortable it can feel. You can settle into a version of yourself that isn't really right for you simply because it's familiar. When something feels familiar long enough, it stops feeling wrong. Comfort doesn't always mean it matches who you want to be. Sometimes it just means you've repeated it enough times for it to feel normal, which hides the fact that you've changed. Change can be temporary, but only if something breaks the pattern. It could be an environment change. Maybe you catch yourself reacting in a way that doesn't feel like you, or maybe you finally slow down long enough to notice the gap between who you are and who you're meant to be. Those moments can feel heavy, but they reveal how long the shift has been happening in the background. But here's the important part. You're not stuck in the version of yourself you slipped into. You're actually changing all the time, which means you always have the chance to shape yourself back to who you actually are. Once you see what's been influencing you, things suddenly make sense. You can decide what parts of yourself you want to keep, what parts don't feel like you anymore, and what needs adjusting. You can change the spaces you spend time in, or the behaviors you've been absorbing, instead of letting them change you. And you can choose new habits that actually match the person you're trying to grow into. It's not something that happens overnight, and it doesn't need a big dramatic moment. All you need is awareness and a little intention. That alone is enough to stop the drift. And maybe that's the real takeaway. People don't become someone they never chose because they're careless. It happens because life moves fast. Influence is subtle, and nobody goes through it untouched. Identity isn't fixed. It's something you reshape over and over. And even if you didn't choose the version of yourself you became by accident, you can choose another version of yourself you like more. Once you understand how easy it is to drift, you also understand how powerful it is to finally steer.